Welcome to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership, where you'll hear insights and useful strategies, as well as lessons learned from other nonprofit leaders and valuable tips from a variety of experts. Here to help you with the challenges and opportunities you face day after day is your host and nonprofit leadership expert, Sarah Olivieri.
Hello, nonprofit leaders, and welcome to your go-to place for information and inspiration to help you be even more effective. I'm your host, Sarah Olivieri, and you're listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. I have a very special guest for you today, Michael Randel, who is an experienced organizational change practitioner and has worked with clients in more than 30 countries, supporting organizations through change and growth. And today we're going to be talking about leadership, coaching, and counseling and support and things like that. Michael founded Randall Consulting Associates in 2010, where he and a team of associates work with leaders from philanthropic foundations, nonprofit organizations, corporations, and public sector agencies. He has a very formidable background, and I encourage you to check out his full bio in the show notes. Welcome, Michael. Before we dive into our topic today, would you share a little bit about yourself personally to round yourself out as a whole person for our audience?
Oh, goodness me. Do we have time for that whole introducing the full me? Well, so hello, Sarah, and hello, everybody who's listening today. One of the first things you may notice is that my accent might be a little bit different to what you might normally hear across North America. And that's because I grew up in different countries, but I spent most of my time through my childhood and early adulthood living in South Africa. And this was in from the 70s, 80s, 90s. But particularly what I want to kind of comment about that part of it is when I was kind of coming of age, finishing college in the early 90s, we didn't really have in South Africa something called nonprofits. We had something that we were calling the civil society sector. And a lot of it was oriented as anti-apartheid activism. And so if you can think back, or if you know of that period of time, there was a huge mobilization of the country as opposition to apartheid and its evil laws and its terrible impacts on people. And so I never thought of having per se a career in the nonprofit sector because we didn't think that far ahead. It was like, it's all about the moment. Right. And then when I began actually working in nonprofit organizations there and subsequently coming over to the United States, I became really aware that the energy, the enthusiasm, the skills that you have in the moment are often fantastic for the moment, but they're not necessarily the things that will equip you to have a long, successful career, being able to meet new challenges that come up. And so, for example, anybody who was in leadership of a nonprofit in March of 2020, we were facing this novel challenge, the pandemic, right? And you couldn't draw on prior experience. So one of the things I'm really interested in and pay attention to myself is lifelong learning. How do we equip ourselves for the challenges, the new challenges of today and whatever might be coming up tomorrow?
Yeah, well, that's such a great, interesting background and great example to draw from. And I think it leads us very well to our topic today, lifelong learning, leadership coaching. And I wanted to particularly talk about this topic with you because I think the for-profit industry has embraced, executive coaching for a long time. But it's something that I think is still predominantly missing as a common practice in the nonprofit space. And I think it's really, really important. I assume you do too. So let's just talk a little bit about that lifelong learning. And when you think about coaching, because people define coaching, but when you think about leadership coaching, what is that in your own words? And why and when should leaders be seeking it out?
Yeah. Well, so there's a range of different terms, and maybe we should take a moment just to distinguish between them. So three come to mind right away: a mentor, a coach, and an advisor. Right. And I think they're distinct things. So an advisor is somebody who kind of comes in to help you, support you around a particular technical challenge, let's call it that, programmatic issue, fundraising strategy question, to help you develop tactics that you can apply to solve that problem, right? Very relevant, very timely, but often they're bringing their expertise and you're learning from them to do what they recommend you do. Good. A
Yeah.
mentor is kind of at the other end of the spectrum. It's somebody who helps you think about your career, right? Your broad development as a person and as a professional. And what I find really interesting these days is that your mentor is not necessarily older than you or more experienced than you, right? There's a notion that people sometimes talk about as reverse mentoring, where older people are being mentored by a younger person who's helping them learn how to become more digitally fluent, for example, or more clued into the kind of inclusion, belonging, equity orientation that I think many younger people have grown up with as a more natural part of who they are. So mentoring is that kind of, where should I be looking for my next opportunity? How do I broaden my experience and maybe in my next job? And what do I do to prepare for that? So I think then coaching comes in the middle, right? Coaching is developmental, right? By which I mean it is about supporting and nurturing and developing you as a person for this moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
It's not remedial. And this is one of the sort of myths maybe of coaching, particularly in its early days, if that you were like, if you were in trouble at work, if you were sort of at risk of being moved out, you would be sent for coaching as a last resort. And
Yeah.
that's very much not the framework, the orientation that we have as professional coaches. It's supporting leaders who are doing important work, but they're facing a new situation. And there's a whole range of them that we can go into about what will be the trigger or the catalyst for having coaching. But it's about supporting you. And what the coach does that's different from the advisor and from the mentor is they're not going to tell you what to do, which is what some people are looking for, right?
Right. Yep.
But what the coach does is help you. They can bring some perspective, they can bring ideas, but what they're really trying to do is help you learn how to make sense of things for yourself, right? So that ability for not just lifelong learning, but also for reflective learning. And they're helping you learn how to notice your mindset, your beliefs, where those get in the way, so that you can, as you have then new experiences, you also then begin to develop new beliefs about your capacity and your potential. The idea of that is when you finish your coaching relationship, as a leader, you actually are better off and better equipped to continue self-learning, self-reflection. Whereas with an advisor, once that expertise goes, you're back to square zero.
Yeah, I love those differentiations. I hadn't used the word advisor much, but often similar meaning when people talk about consultants, right? A consultant is that expert advisor. And I know in my own coaching, I often, tell people I do a hybrid of coaching and advise. I don't usually use the word advising, but I think I will now because I like that word better than consulting. I'm always looking for words that are clearer on their own or as we use them. Because certainly, and I think those two, for me at least, I see them working hand in hand. As a coach, I'm often thinking about my clients and assessing what new information are they ready for? Are they even in a learning mode, like a expert, skills and tactics learning mode, or are they in the mindset mode you talked about? Because oftentimes if their mindset isn't like that has to kind of change first before they can level up a skill set, let's say, or a tactical set, an action set. They have to be ready for that. And sometimes I see that overcoming fears. Sometimes I see it taking on a new level of feeling empowered to do something that they didn't feel empowered to do. And personally, I find it really interesting work. So I'd love to hear from you about why leaders, when they should be seeking out coaching, and who within an organization do you think if you're limited resources for bringing in a coach, like where do you bring that in? How do you utilize that in an organization?
Yes. Yeah, well, there's a kind of a traditional way in which coaches are introduced, and that's for what I'm going to call a new leader, right? So think of it as somebody who's been promoted to a new level, right? They may have been a manager before, but now they're becoming a director or a vice president or executive director. So that sort of step up is often a good catalyst for coaching,
Yeah.
because what you want to do in that next level is operate at a new, higher level of perspective, of decision making, of strategic orientation. And if you bring in old mindsets and old behaviors that were effective when you were, say, just managing a team, but now you're directing a function, those are not going to necessarily be a really good fit. So the coaching can help you work out what's different and how do I step into and inhabit and embody this new level of responsibility and capability that I bring. So that's a very often helpful trigger that often gets used.
Yeah. Other ones?
Well, talk about a lateral transfer, right? So this is common in larger organizations. So let's think of let's say it's a national nonprofit. They've got offices in different parts of the country, each of which is running a regional program. And somebody moves from being the regional director of Pennsylvania to the regional director in Ohio, right? Same level, same responsibility, but a completely different context. Coaching is a
Yeah.
good opportunity for that, right?
Yeah.
Helping them check in. What are my assumptions about this job? And how do I make sure that what I'm thinking of doing is appropriate to here and not simply a learned behavior that was suitable there, but won't work here?
Yeah, I love that. And too, in that situation, there's that, you are both experienced and a beginner, right? You're new in that situation. And there are some things that, we can only do with teams who are used to us. We don't have that level of trust with our new team. We have to kind of start at the building blocks of building those relationships. And it can be certainly, I think, uncomfortable, unsteady territory for folks. It makes a lot of sense why coaching would be beneficial,
Yeah,
because things aren't quite as they were. And I think the more similar the context, the harder it can be, the more likely we are to just default to be like, oh, it's just the same. But it's
right,
not. I was actually
right.
thinking about that. I'm a sailboat racer. And I was hearing about a fellow crew member in the area who's used to sailing a bigger version of a similar boat to the one I race. And a friend of mine has the same boat. And they were saying how this sailor brought some tactics that, all the same types of sails, the same types of maneuvers, but on the bigger boat, you did it differently. You could do
Mhm.
things on the smaller boat that you couldn't do in that bigger boat. And so they were subtle, but harder to get that person to transition because they were subtle, because
Right.
they're thinking, "Oh, this is just the same thing," and they're not picking up
Yeah.
on the subtle differences and the new opportunities and the things that are, the old opportunities that no longer work. So is there another scenario that you see is a
Uh,
trigger for
yeah,
coaching?
I mean, so maybe two or three more. The one is about coaching for high potential leaders, right? And so it's actually increasingly common to see people who are attending a leadership development program have coaching as a component of that program.
Yeah.
And I think that's great because, again, one of the challenges of any kind of learning piece is that you kind of learning in the classroom, you're learning out of context. You get good ideas, you get inspired, but you've got to make it work in reality. And that's where the
Yeah.
coaching can really help people work out, how do I take a really good principle, but make it work in my setting?
Yeah, I love that one. In fact, it's a principle that I hold with almost all my program. If we're talking about leadership level work, no training without coaching,
Mhm.
because if you're implementing your learning in a complex, dynamic environment, you're going to need some help. It's like you've been given a new puzzle piece, but then you have to form that puzzle piece to fit into your existing puzzle.
Right.
And that requires some help, I'd say, 9 times out of 10. So I love
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
you said there were a few others.
Well, I'll name a couple. One would be the organizational context has changed. It's become more challenging, right? So you're not changing your role. You're not being promoted. You're still in the same place, but you're working in a different environment. So coaching can be helpful. Again, a lot of this is what you were describing it as, taking care to not get stuck in your mindset and beliefs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to be supported in learning how to learn, how to make sense of what you're experiencing, what's working, what's not working.
Yeah. I see the scenario a lot in executive directors who are starting to build their first C-suite. They're
Mhm.
used to being the sole executive, and now they need to learn to operate with a team of executives. So that's a really
Right.
great one. And the last one you want to share?
Yes, this is fairly common in many organizations. There's an interim leader, right? So the
Mm.
current full-time person's left. There's a search process going on, and maybe for 6 months or a year, there's going to be an interim from, let's say, among the staff. It's really helpful for that person to have a coach because it's a new thing. One is that they've got this executive responsibility, but the other is that they're having to now lead their peers. And so there can be all sorts of dynamics that show up around that will be novel for that leader. And having a coach who's a confidential partner, who's a good sounding board to help you get perspective and think through what to do around some of these new situations that they're facing.
I love it. So you've been coaching a long time. Tell me about what that process looks like
Yeah.
for clients as they go through this experience.
Um, well, what I find is that coaching works best when there's a reasonable commitment of time. And so I typically contract around 6 months or 12 months for a coaching relationship, right? And think of it in 3 phases. The first phase might take, so let me also say that coaching sessions will often occur about every 2 weeks or once a month. Okay. So the first 2 or 3 sessions, which might cover a month or 6 weeks, is about establishing the coaching goals, right? So as a leader, well, I've asked for a coach because I know I need help in becoming a new leader, right? So I have a sense of my purpose, right? But what we do in that very beginning stage is help you get a kind of a good perspective on where are you right now. And so part of that is very often doing some kind of an assessment. It could be a self-assessment tool, something like MBTI or one of the emotional intelligence tools to help you get a good view of yourself. Sometimes we do a 360 assessment where
Mhm.
people around you are also invited to contribute to that assessment and give input and perspective around this. We might collect those views by doing some interviews, right? But all of that is to kind of help build a picture of where is this leader now? How are they perceived? What are seen as what they're doing well? What might be things that are less developed for them? And so
Yeah.
all of that rich mix helps to establish the coaching goals, right?
And
Once
I want
that's
to ask you a
established,
question before we move
yeah,
on to the next step.
yeah.
In your experience, because I know as a coach, I've played around a lot with that frequency of meetings. How did you come to, or did you try different, the 2 weeks versus once a month versus weekly? I'd just love to hear a little bit about your experience and thoughts
Mm.
related to that.
I think a lot of it is informed by the situation that the leader's working in,
Mm.
right? Several of the people that I've been coaching have fairly hectic schedules. So carving out an hour every 2 weeks is really very, very hard. Because we also do seek to do these typically within working hours, right?
Mhm.
So sometimes then the frequency of once a month works better.
Yeah.
But then I've got other clients where we meet every 2 weeks. They have a different pace in their work. They have different kinds of questions that are coming up. And so that pacing is a better match for them, right? So coaching is very personalized, very tailored to what the person needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. I found with a lot of my clients, I haven't done one-on-one as much one-on-one coaching in the last couple of years because of my own schedule. I tend to do group coaching, but when I was doing one-on-one where the mindset shift needed to happen, I started doing weekly 15-minute coaching sessions, which were so effective. They were like that little, like they understood the mindset needed to change, But the reality of changing was like they needed
Mhm.
that frequent little, nope, that was the, just the nudge,
Right.
nudge, nudge
Right.
till they, fully adopted it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think
that's
that's
a really good
interesting.
tactic. And
Yeah.
I think of that as partly being the accountability partner, which is
Yes.
another role that the coach can play because you know what the person's working on. They kind of say, here's something I want to try this week. So that
Hmm.
15-minute check-in. So how did it go? Did you
Yeah.
get the results you wanted? What could you tweak as you try it again? And, so there is that kind of nudging and adjusting as you go.
Yeah. So what's
But
the
yeah, I mean,
second choice? Yeah. Go ahead.
the majority of the coaching contract is spent in these one-on-one sessions. So a couple of things that are really important to name that we haven't said explicitly. Coaching is confidential, right? It's a kind of a space between the coach and the client. Even when the organization pays for the coaching, the organization has no access to the topics we're talking about, to the issues that are coming up, to the advice that's being given. We really maintain, and it's a very important part of coaching ethics, that confidentiality. So once we've established the coaching goals, they remain visible as we work through things, but each session really is focused on what matters for the client today, right? Because something maybe come up. And so, we don't come in and say, because we're not following a curriculum, right? So it's now session 6, we're on topic 6. No, it's like we're working around your effectiveness as a team leader. That might be the broad goal. So they come in and say, oh, we had this really challenging team meeting last week, and I really want to kind of debrief it and think about how I prepare for the one that's coming up next week. So it's always very contextual, very topical, guided by the client, right? And we work through that over the kind of agreed period of time. And then finally, as we move towards the ending, it's kind of starting to help make sure the client um, has the tools and resources to continue as a lifelong. It's about taking stock of what's changed for them. What new beliefs are they having? What did they see as their next growing edge? Right. So it's a kind of
Yeah.
an arc. We kind of get
Yep.
started at the beginning by working out what matters to you most and how do we support you with that, providing that support, and then ending it with kind of, in a sense, tying the knot, right? So it's like bring it all back together, make it visible, make it evident, which can be very kind of encouraging and motivating for the leader. And
Yeah.
then, they continue on in their own new resourcefulness.
Yeah. Do you have some favorite coaching questions that you often lead sessions with that you find help your
Mhm.
clients along the way?
Yeah, there's one that I'm using more and more because it's actually very powerful. How are you feeling?
Mm,
Right? It's not probing for information about the work, about the context. It's inviting the leader to kind of pause and notice what's going on in my body, right? I might have an emotion, that's my feeling response. But if I then take that and unpack it a little bit, are there stresses in my shoulder or neck? Is my belly rumbling? Am I having sleepless nights? Right? Because our body gives so much information to us if we're just able to hear it, right?
yeah.
It can help us notice when we're kind of off center,
Yep. Yeah.
right? And so there's a lot of coaching practice where with colleagues and others where there's a lot of attention around mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so, partly that's just like, we've got an hour together, you've got a normally hectic schedule. Let's take this hour, let's just become still. Let's focus. Let's become grounded. And then we can give attention to what you're working on. So part of
Yeah.
that is to help in this moment become more settled. But it's also about building disciplines and habits that they can continue to use by themselves. So when they get off center by some stressful thing, they can remember to come back and just do a short breathing exercise or something like that, just to recenter themselves and then give themselves the perspective on how do I respond to a challenge that's just erupted in front of
Yeah. I love that one. I think it's really important for leaders to learn their own emotional intelligence, mindfulness
me.
about themselves, and then take it a step further and learn to be aware of what's going on around them. I often talking to my clients about, who are leaders, read the room. When you enter a meeting, when you talk with your team, ask some probing, they learn the probing coaching questions I teach them or that I
Mhm.
use with them, and they start using it with their teams in this concept of read the room, look at everybody, and, do an assessment yourself. Are you ready to move on? And I see that in my own coaching, even farther into a coaching. Sometimes people will be like, yeah, this is the plan. This is it. Verbally, they'll be like, yeah, but their body language is
Mhm.
saying, no, I don't want to
No.
do that. And
Right.
that's, I feel like as a coach, that's my job is like, I hear you saying yes, but your body's saying no. So let's understand what's going on there.
Yeah.
What a powerful question. Are there other favorites that you like?
I mean, that's such a powerful one because it opens up all sorts of insights, awareness, etc., etc. Rather than sharing a question, I actually want to offer something else. It's a different
Yeah.
perspective about coaching because I think traditionally coaching is thought of as a one-to-one relationship.
Hmm.
So let me offer the idea of a two-to-one relationship, right? Coaching of a leadership dyad, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
can take different forms. It could be you have two co-CEOs or co-EDs of an organization. That's reasonably common, right? Or it could be, as an example I worked with recently, the outgoing executive director, you know, announced several months in advance that she would be leaving. The board recruited the the new ED who happened to be on staff. So she was being
Yeah.
promoted. But she had several months to go before taking up the responsibility. But of course, everything's shifted, right? And so what we did there was we worked with the two of them as a leadership dyad, working out roles and responsibilities because the current ED is still the ED
Yeah.
and the new person is not yet the ED. But they need a bit of period of time to take on what are the mindsets, the behaviors, the practices of an ED. So over the course of the year that I worked with them, there was a sort of a shifting of the role and relationship. It wasn't constant through the whole time. So we worked with them as a pair and how they were together managing the dynamics of staff, going to one and then to the other, trying to get the answer that they wanted, and how were they together and clear about boundaries and roles and decisions. And then I also worked with each of them because the one was making a transition of leaving and
Mm-hmm.
the other was
Right.
making the transition of stepping up. And so they were different and we couldn't talk about that together, but it made sense to do sort of those as one-on-one things. So
Yeah.
that kind of dyadic, we call it dyad me too, dyad coaching can be very powerful as well because it also acknowledges this is our context. Let's not pretend we're just isolated individuals. We are in this relationship. So we're going to be coached in terms of the relationship.
Yeah. I love that. As someone who does group coaching in a small group with multiple executive directors, and sometimes those executive directors will bring their kind of second in charge with them into the dynamic. I see a lot of positives. I think what you said earlier about, confidentiality, and with that group, establishing that group trust is key. It doesn't work if people don't feel safe. But when they do, I see that group dynamic having really powerful impacts for everybody. People come just to listen. Sometimes they're learning from it. Sometimes it's easier, right, to see somebody else's challenge and than it is the same challenge in yourself. And then I also see, the kind of folks who've been in coaching longer being great, and even coaches offering their own reflections for their peers. And then I see that life cycle because I have a number of clients who have stayed for several years as they, are in new contexts and they've got new things. They tend to come to coaching with they do kind of self-coach. They need to come to the call and then they say, here's my issue and I know what you're going to say, Sarah. And then they say it. And then I'm like, there you go. There. And it's nice
Right.
to see that evolve to that place that I think you talk about, as you reach the end of coaching. To me, that's kind of what success looks like,
Mhm.
is when the person is able, and not to say that that doesn't mean people don't benefit from coaching, because it's really helpful to have that accountability piece. But you see people truly evolve in coaching to this place where they can, to a great extent, coach
Yeah.
themselves. They gain so much awareness and so many skills about self-reflection and guidance in and knowing when to ask for help
Mhm.
or when to be bolder. I love that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to talk about, I think coaching, I think often, as I said earlier, seen as developmental, like it's suited to somebody who's newer. But I had an interesting thing which, taps into what you were saying about more experienced leaders. I had a person I was speaking with recently to see whether I might be their coach. They've been in their position for 16 years. They've been incredibly successful, and their environment has shifted in some very
Yeah.
volatile ways.
Yeah.
And they know that what they're facing is something that's new for them, despite their great experience. They feel that they could probably get through it, but they want to have not an advisor, but they want to have a sounding board that they can try things out on, get really honest feedback on, so that they can have more confidence in that the way that they're doing this is something that's thought through and is more intentional rather than just reactive. So really,
Yeah.
wherever you are in your career, or the higher or lower the role, it doesn't matter. We all benefit from coaching as a form of targeted support
I
to
love that you,
help you
yeah.
become better, help you get clearer about how to be a reflective learner, a reflective practitioner.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up. And certainly I've had a number of clients. I have a lot of first-time executive directors, but that doesn't mean they are new. Some of them they were the founders there. They've been in their role for 25 years. And I think, you're absolutely right. And in fact, I don't almost go thinking off the cuff, go so far as to say that the more experienced leaders just they get that much more out of it. They can use their experience, they can apply things faster, they accelerate faster. So it's almost even more beneficial to those experienced and already successful leaders than to those newer folks. I love it. Any final words of wisdom for our audience out there, as well as who and how should get in touch with you?
Well, I would say that um, asking for coaching might feel very vulnerable, right? And it is, right? Because you're sort of saying, I'm struggling in some manner. I'm not feeling that I'm up to the task in front of me. But I think that's a really good feeling to have, because it helps you realize that you can't just rely on past experience or current mindsets. There is something new and different. And so coaching is one way that you can be supported to learn through that period of time and be positioned to become more effective. So that's what I would say is, like, try it out, go for it. Take that vulnerability and use it as a power, energy power, to fuel your learning and growing effectiveness.
Yeah, love it.
So
And
yeah,
then who's out to you and what's the best way
reaching
to do
out to
so?
me. So kind of two main ways. I'm quite active on LinkedIn. You'll see a lot of posts that I do that providing tips and things like that for leaders. So reach out to me that way, or through my website. And that's www.rcachangeadvisors.com. And again, there's resources there. We'll share it in the show notes, but you can also contact me through the website. And I'd love to chat with anybody who's listening today, who's curious about becoming more effective as a leader through coaching or through other means.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for being such a wonderful guest. And thank you out there for listening, but also for all that you do to make our communities better. This podcast is here to help people like you, executive directors, board members, and other nonprofit leaders unleash your full potential to advance the missions I know you care about so deeply. So, in addition to these guest expert episodes, I also bring you a weekly newsletter where you can get highly actionable, bite-sized tips delivered right to your email inbox. And you can access that at inspirednonprofitleadership.com/sign up. And if you have a moment, please leave a review for this podcast, as it really helps other leaders like yourself find this resource. Until next time, all the best.
You've been listening to Inspired Nonprofit Leadership. Thanks so much for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode or the bonus episodes. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Tune in every week for more useful insights and wisdom on nonprofit leadership. Thanks so much for all you do for the communities you serve. Until next time, all the best.